The storm was so loud that night that even the streetlights trembled under the violent wind. Rain fell in sheets, turning the quiet suburban streets of Portland, Oregon into a blur of gray and cold. And right in the middle of that chaos stood Mara Collins, shivering, soaked to her skin, holding nothing but a small backpack that carried the last pieces of her life. Behind her, the door slammed, followed by the cold, cruel truth she had been trying to ignore for months. She had been thrown out, discarded like she didn't matter, after being told that a woman with no kids and no real purpose didn't belong in that house anymore. She had spent years taking care of her partner's parents, giving up her dreams and her time, only to be discarded the moment she struggled. It was bitter, humiliating, and beyond heartbreaking. If you believe no one deserves this kind of cruelty, and that kindness still matters, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. It truly helps us bring more meaningful stories to you. That night, Mara wandered under the storm with nowhere to go and no one to call. Her own family was long gone, and the few friends she once had were scattered across different states. As she walked, her shoes filled with water, her legs trembling from exhaustion and cold. She had only one direction in her mind: the old residential neighborhood where she used to volunteer, the place where she once felt like she mattered. She didn't know what she hoped to find there. Maybe just a sense of familiarity, a corner where she could sit until morning. But fate had prepared something else entirely, something she couldn't have imagined even in the most desperate hours of her life. Across town, inside a warm, modern home with tall windows that glowed like lanterns in the night, Lucas Warner, a 41-year-old single father and CEO of a growing tech company, was trying to convince his 5-year-old daughter Anna to sleep. She was a sweet, gentle child with curious eyes and the softest blonde curls tied in a ponytail. Since her mother passed 3 years before, Lucas had been both her anchor and her comfort, doing everything in his power to keep her world stable. He held leadership meetings by day and braided her hair with clumsy determination by night. But today, even Anna sensed something unsettled in the atmosphere. The storm outside made her restless, and Lucas felt the old ache rising in his chest, the loneliness that never fully left. He had money, success, and respect. Yet every night when he sat at the dining table, only 2 chairs were filled, his and Anna's, and no amount of achievements could fill the emptiness left behind by his late wife's absence. As the storm raged, Lucas happened to glance outside while closing the curtains, and froze. Under the dim streetlight, barely visible through the rain, was a woman walking slowly, stumbling as if the ground beneath her shifted with every step. Something about the way she wrapped her arms around herself, the defeated slump in her shoulders, pulled something inside him. He knew despair when he saw it. He had lived with it once, and it had taken everything in him not to collapse under its weight. He stepped closer, trying to see her face. When she moved, he caught sight of her pale lips and the lost expression in her eyes. Without thinking, Lucas grabbed his coat and rushed outside. The moment he called out to her, Mara turned, startled. She saw a well-dressed man with warm eyes, someone who looked like he belonged to another world entirely, the kind of world she could only dream about. But what struck her most was not his appearance. It was the genuine concern in his expression. No one had looked at her that way in a very long time. Lucas approached her carefully, making sure he didn't frighten her. He asked if she was okay, if she needed help. Mara opened her mouth to speak, but her voice cracked under the cold and the weight of the night. She managed only a whisper, telling him she had been thrown out and had nowhere to go. Something in her tone made Lucas's heart lurch. He knew what hopelessness sounded like. Without hesitation, he offered her shelter for the night, not out of pity, but out of human decency, something he believed the world desperately needed more of. Inside his warm home, Mara felt her body trembling uncontrollably as the heat touched her frozen skin. Anna peeked at her shyly from behind her father's arm, and Lucas introduced her softly. The little girl smiled, a warm, innocent smile that pierced through the heaviness clouding Mara's heart. It was the first gentle smile she had seen in months. Lucas gave Mara dry clothes and let her sit near the fireplace while he prepared something warm for her. Mara watched him move around the kitchen with practiced grace, a sight that felt strangely comforting. The house smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread, and for the first time since morning, she felt the tightness around her chest loosen. As hours passed, Lucas learned bits of her story, not all at once, but in quiet, careful pieces. He learned how she had devoted 5 years to someone who didn't value her, how she had never been able to have children, and how that had been used against her, how she had lost her job recently and had been trying to rebuild her life. Her words came slowly, but each one carried the weight of years of exhaustion. Lucas told her about losing his wife, about raising Anna alone, about the pressure of running a company while trying to be both parents at once. Their worlds were different, but their pain was equally deep. And somehow, in the space of a few hours, 2 lonely stories began to intertwine. Over the next few weeks, Mara stayed in the guest room while she looked for a job. Lucas didn't pry or push her. He simply offered a safe space, something she had never known before. Anna quickly grew attached to her, always asking Mara to read bedtime stories or help her pick outfits for school. Mara, who once believed she wasn't meant for motherhood, found herself caring for the child with a gentleness she didn't know she still possessed. Lucas, in turn, found comfort in Mara's presence. She didn't judge him for the moments he felt overwhelmed, nor did she treat him like a CEO. She saw him as a man trying his best, and he saw her as a woman stronger than she realized. But life wasn't done testing them. One morning, Mara received a call for an interview, her first solid chance in months. She was terrified, but determined. Lucas encouraged her, reminding her of her worth. She went to the interview and did remarkably well, but the fear of failing still shadowed her. When she returned home, Lucas and Anna were waiting for her with warm smiles, giving her the reassurance she needed. Days later, Mara was hired. That night, Mara cried, not because she was sad, but because she finally felt like life was giving her a second chance. And then, something even more unexpected happened. Lucas began to see her differently, not as a guest or a passing visitor, but as someone whose presence brought balance to his home. Someone who made Anna laugh more freely. Someone whose strength resonated with his own. He started inviting her to family outings, to evening walks, to quiet dinners after Anna slept. Mara, too, felt her heart opening in ways she feared it never would again. She saw kindness in Lucas, not the performative type, but the quiet, consistent kind that heals broken places. She saw a father who adored his child, a leader who carried his responsibilities with integrity, and a man who listened when she spoke. Months passed, and what began as a night of desperation grew into something neither of them expected. Mara found a home. Lucas found peace. Anna found love in someone who treated her with gentle affection. And one evening, under a calm sky far different from the storm that first brought Mara to their doorstep, Lucas confessed that meeting her had changed everything. Mara felt tears fill her eyes as she realized that the very thing she was discarded for, her inability to have children, had led her to a child who adored her and a man who cherished her. Sometimes life breaks you, only to rebuild you somewhere safer, somewhere kinder. If this story touched your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. It truly helps the channel grow and brings more emotional stories your way. Before the ending, please comment. Kindness saves lives. In the end, Mara discovered that family isn't always the one you're born into. Sometimes, it's the one who opens the door when the world has shut you out. And sometimes, a storm isn't the end, but the beginning of a life you were always meant to find.